Black Monday is a yearly occurrence across the league where dysfunctional franchises hope to right the ship by getting rid of incumbent coaches and hiring up-and-comers. And you've come to the right place to hear the top candidates and fits for these teams. Hey YouTube, my name is Tyler, and welcome back to The Athletic Nerd. Here's a quick disclaimer before I start the video. Obviously, not all of these franchises are clearly dysfunctional, and some of the coaches that were fired weren't outright terrible, but I don't fault the front office for making these moves. I will be mentioning teams in order from my least to best destinations. Now to start, during the process of making this video, news dropped of the hiring of Nathaniel Hackett to the Denver Broncos, who is a former offensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers, which was going to be my top destination for potential head coaches. It has already been framed as a means to recruit Aaron Rodgers, but Hackett alone has the resume and pedigree to be worthy of the job, as he was one of the top candidates in the league, which is why the Broncos rushed to hire him so soon before he could continue interviews with other teams. The brains of the organization were probably ready for an offensive-minded coach after dealing with the defensive guru of Vic Fangio in order to contend along with the other high-powered offenses in the division led by elite quarterbacks, as they hope to add their own, especially with the weapons they already have with Javonte Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant, and more. I think he has a high chance of success, but if he adds Rodgers, this might be the best hiring in years. Now, I think, to start with the Houston Texans, I think this is the worst head coaching spot, and by a decent bit if you really think about it. The Texans are the poster child for dysfunctional teams in the NFL, right up there with the Washington football team. As in most cases, this is due to ownership. Bob McNair originally owned the team, but since he passed after his battle with cancer, the ownership fell to his wife and basically his son Cal. Ever since then, the organization has been described as toxic. There have been many allegations around members within the organization across many areas, along with poor roster construction and leadership structure, main of which has fallen onto chaplain turned executive Jack Easterby. New GM hired last year, Nick Caserio, seems like he might have them on the right track. Hasn't done anything alarming so far, but even still, this is a team lacking in talent across the board, and they don't have any extra draft picks at the moment, as many rebuilding teams tend to have, besides an extra 6th-round pick. They will have some cap space, but not an extreme amount, to improve the roster through free agency, since they are on the books for a $35 million in dead cap over a few players, and because Deshaun Watson still has a $40 million cap hit. It's good that they have the number 3 pick in the draft, where it seems like they're guaranteed to get a stud if it's Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, or Evan Neal. In 3rd-round pick, Davis Mills has had a promising rookie season, and that he could maybe continue on from as a young quarterback for the future. Now, my favorite coaching recommendations include, I'd say, Josh McDaniels, simply because Nick Caserio himself came from the New England Patriots, and that Josh McDaniels was the offensive coordinator there. He's had a head coaching gig before, and hopefully he learned from his experience to rebuild the roster. Apparently, Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator of the Eagles, had a very good interview, and he may be hired there as well. Now, next, I have the Chicago Bears. And I have a few reasons for them to be at this spot, because they have a few things going for them, as well as a few things that aren't. To start with the positives, main and basically only one is Justin Fields. Him alone is what makes a lot of people think of this as a go-to destination, which I don't blame, but there's a lot of other good spots on this list too. He was my number 2 rated quarterback from last year's draft class, and he would have been a surefire top pick this year if he would have stayed in school. But because of the pre-draft process, along with the loaded class at the position, he fell to 11. And this caused the Bears to trade up with the New York Giants, who will be mentioned soon. I think that Fields will be a success with the right system around him and a supporting cast, but right now the supporting cast is very lacking. The wide receiving core is bare, besides Darnell Mooney, especially since Allen Robinson is expected to leave after being franchised last year and then having a disappointing season. And the offensive line is also very poor, and they need a few players there. Tevin Jenkins, who they also traded up to draft, has been slightly disappointing after dealing with injury. The running back room is very good with David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, plus Tariq Cohen if he can return to form after injuries. This only adds to the pressure of developing Fields with the large Chicago market, and by trading up for Fields, the Bears don't even have a first-round pick, which would have been a top 10 selection, which sucks for a team that should essentially be rebuilding but is starting a few steps behind and essentially handcuffed. The defense is old but solid, so the timeline of the team is slightly out of whack, when this means that they're even steps away from being where they need to be, which is why they're so low on this list. But a decent place to go with a lot of potential, mainly with Fields. I was going to recommend one of the young offensive-minded head coaches like Kellen Moore or Byron Leftwich, but the Bears hired Matt Eberflus, who was the defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. I don't know much about him, but there's nothing alarming off jump, and it seems like it will come mainly down to the offensive coordinator he hires to develop Fields and the rest of the staff he brings in. Now, next up, and the newest addition to the list, would be the New Orleans Saints. And this is because Sean Payton has stepped away from the team after the Saints missed the playoffs. And the reputation is a very good one for the Saints organization and for the team as a whole, which does make sense. With the pace Jameis Winston was on, the Saints could have been a contender, and then their backup quarterback, Taysom Hill, was injured to stack upon that. But Payton got out at just the right time. Everyone talks about the Rams sacrificing draft picks in order to contend and how it will affect them down the line, but the Saints have essentially been doing the same thing with cap space, restructuring contracts to delay cap hits and cutting depth in order to retain high-level players. Their cap situation is by far the worst in the league. While there is obviously some things they can do with the cap as they've done in years before, it seems like they will likely lose a few key players this year, whether it's Jameis Winston, Teron Armstead, Marcus Williams, or others. And even outside of the stars, the roster lacks talent in many areas like wide receiver, potentially offensive line, and across the defense. At least they have a decent pick and a competent front office, but this is going to be hard to retool and to contend soon. Now, I want them to go get Doug Peterson. I think he deserves another shot. He was a good head coach before, and the Saints can use a veteran coach who knows how to win if they want to contend again instead of one of these younger, inexperienced guys. Now, next on the list, I have the New York Football Giants. I don't think this is too bad of a spot, but the spotlight and the extra media attention and pressure that comes with the job is a factor. But the Giants do have a decent bit of talent across the roster. It just always felt like there was something off, which does make sense since they have been one of the worst teams and definitely mediocre within at least the past 5 years. Saquon has had the potential to be the best back in the league if he can get fully healthy again, but that is a big if. They have a lot of good wide receivers and a few studs on defense. And to help, they have the 5th and 7th picks in a loaded draft where it seems like they're guaranteed to get a star at 5 and a great lineman at 7, which is exactly what they need. However, they are a team lacking in cap space, but as they move off a few big contracts within the next 2 years, and as young talent develops, with likely a new quarterback, whether through a veteran trade or a rookie quarterback, then the Giants can expect a quick turnaround, which will be welcomed in the Meadowlands after what has essentially been a 6 to 10 year rebuild. Now, with recommendations, many have one in Flores here, but combined with the fact that the Giants' new GM is from the Dolphins front office and the rift that exists there, and that I just don't think he has completely figured out the offensive side of the ball. He had 4 offensive coordinators in 3 years, but he does seem like a decent talent evaluator and like a qualified guy who can perform a quick rebuild. Besides him, I like to promote Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, who was a hot candidate during last year's cycle and has already been in the organization. Seems like he might be qualified enough, but back to Flores, it's just like if they do have to get another quarterback, and after what he did with Tua, I'm not extremely confident in what he can do to develop and to improve that offense and just creativity on that end. Now, next up, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And the Vikings are a team that has had its fair share of talent combined with mellowing and mediocrity, which calls into question how much this falls on former head coach Mike Zimmer. They have a lot of offensive weapons and a solid line with potential with 2021 draftees Christian Darrisaw, Wyatt Davis, plus other guys with Garrett Bradbury, Ezra Cleveland, and Brian O'Neill. The defense needs work, and the controversy around Kirk Cousins and what to do with him remains. One of the things I like about this team is the flexibility. Like with the Giants, in a year or two, they will be able to move on from these contracts, from the bad ones at least, while maintaining young talent such as Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, and if they really want to, they can move off of Kirk Cousins and at least the first-round pick, while also having young quarterback Kellen Mond, who I viewed as a potential starter caliber guy and was my 6th-ranked quarterback in my draft rankings last season. Now, my coaching recommendations, this is the team I'd really prefer Brian Flores as the coach. While the Vikings might be hesitant to hire another defensive-minded coach, I like Flores here because the Vikings have less questions on offense, and you don't have to worry about him developing a quarterback in this case. If not him, then maybe a Dan Quinn who can hope to replicate what he did with Matt Ryan, Devontae Freeman, and Julio Jones with Jefferson, Cook, and Kirk to a similar enough extent. Maybe not to make the Super Bowl. Obviously, those guys aren't exactly the same tier, but at least get back to the playoffs, especially with such a relatively weak division. Next up, I have the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't even know why I have them this high in ranking, especially since I really do like the Giants head coaching spot. Now, something just seems off with the organization with the amount of troubles they've had for years, but I do think it is telling that they have the best quarterback listed so far. The Raiders do have some cap space and just a solid team overall. They need help on the O-line, but the skill positions are good. The defense needs some work at linebacker and secondary, but the defensive line is very good, led by Max Crosby, who has been amazing, and Yannick Ngakoue. I could also argue to have them ranked lower just because of the division and competition they're in, but it's too late to change and too late to talk myself out of. Now, coaching recommendations, sorry about if my voice is going out a little bit. I think they should give interim Rich Bisaccia a chance simply because the players seem to like him a lot, which is good given the stability of the organization. If not him, then maybe a Byron Leftwich, and definitely it would be hilarious if they hire someone like Eric Bieniemy just to take it from the Chiefs. But I think Bieniemy is really holding out for the Chiefs job whenever Andy Reid retires, which is why you will not see him on this list again. Now, next up, I have the Miami Dolphins. Now, this is one of my favorite spots. If I were a head coach, this would probably be my preferred destination, and it's neck and neck with my number one team, which I will get to in a moment. While Chris Grier has made some mistakes during his time as GM, and after what he did with Flores, it may be interesting. It may make coaches a little hesitant to go there given the power structure, but the Dolphins are fairly loaded with young talent, which is what you hope for after the fire sale they had a few years ago. Waddle's already a superstar after breaking the rookie's receptions record. Outside of him, it's kind of iffy. They have a few decent guys, though. Mike Gesicki is very good. He's a free agent. And then Myles Gaskin is decent, but they could probably use an upgrade there. And the offensive line is young but disappointing across the board. And then defense was somewhat disappointing overall, but they have a lot of high-level players with Javon Holland, Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, etc. And they do have a lot of cap space to spend for the offseason after narrowly missing the playoffs. If they put it all together, this is a team set up for the future, especially if Tua can continue on a Drew Brees trajectory, which is a lofty expectation to meet, but essentially the only choice at this point for him to be successful against these other top quarterbacks, even within their own division, such as Josh Allen and even broader with Burrow, Herbert, Lamar, etc. Now, coaching recommendations, I like Brian Dable, Kellen Moore, and once again, Doug Peterson. Just some more offensive-minded guys, but I do think they really need a locker room leader who have the team play consistently over the course of the entire season while prioritizing the development of Tua. Now, at my number one spot, this may be surprising to a lot of people, but it is the Jacksonville Jaguars. It would have been the Broncos at this spot if they didn't already hire Brackett, but I like the case for the Jaguars. And it mainly has to do with Trevor Lawrence. While a lot of people are down on him after he didn't have a good rookie year, it was very clear why he was considered a generational prospect even with the dumpster fire known as Jacksonville. The supporting cast is lacking, they need wide receivers, and Urban Meyer's stupidity is reflected in the running back room after he drafted Etienne in the first round, only for him to get hurt. and not played down, and then misused James Robinson until he tore his Achilles. So that might be a position of need, and along with the offensive line across the board. The defense isn't particularly good anywhere besides cornerback and edge rusher after they draft Thibodeau or Hutchinson to pair with Allen plus Chason, unless they trade out of the pick to draft Evan Neal. I continue to talk myself out of these rankings, to be honest, just looking at the overall Jaguars roster, but I do think they deserve to be here because the division isn't particularly strong. The roster is a blank canvas to craft on whatever vision the new regime wants, and this is a quarterbacks league, and Trevor Lawrence is essentially one of the only quarterbacks you really want to start a franchise with if you could have started all over. Now with recommendations, it seemed like they're very interested in Byron Leftwich, who seems like a very good young coach who can develop Trevor Lawrence, so I would expect him here. But the other guys, just the same names I've been mentioning. So review, these are my rankings and wow, I'm really not going to finish this video. But so those are my rankings, and below I have listed my ideal choice for each destination. I have Josh McDaniels to the Texans, even though it does seem like he may be going to the Raiders now. The Saints get Doug Peterson. The Bears hired Matt Eberflus. The Giants get I had them getting like a Todd Bowles, but they hired Brian Dable. The Vikings, they could hire Brian Flores still. The Raiders, I want them to get Bisaccia, even though it seems like they're bringing back Josh McDaniels. The Dolphins, Kellen Moore. Jaguars, Byron Leftwich. And the Broncos got Nathaniel Brackett. Now, teams to look out to for next year. There are a few teams where it seems like the writing may be on the wall for their current head coach. Now, number one is definitely the Carolina Panthers. Some are calling for Matt Rule to be fired after this season, and because it seems like he may have fired Joe Brady as a scapegoat. Then the Seahawks is definitely, since there does seem to be a rift in the organization where they might have to choose between Russ and Carroll should definitely be the one to go out of those two. He's old. The Legion of Boom era is gone, and it may be time for him to go. And even if they do trade Wilson, then you might just want to have a young guy in there for the rebuild. Then next up is the Browns. This one seems less likely, but if the Browns have another disappointing season with the amount of talent on the roster, then it just might be time to move on. Stefanski doesn't have much pedigree out of that 2020 season, so it's not like he really has too much backing. And next is the Washington football team. They've been mediocre during the entire Rivera era. Great story after he beat cancer, but it might be time to move on if they don't make the playoffs next year, especially depending on what they do at quarterback. Now, teams with potential retirees and other people that can move on are the Chiefs, Steelers, and Buccaneers. These guys that have coached at the same spot for a while, especially if Tom Brady retires in the Buccaneers case. Tomlin has just been with the organization for a long time, and just whenever Andy Reid decides to hang it up. Now, candidates I will look forward to after the season, I had Jonathan Gannon, Dan Quinn, D'Amico Ryans, Raheem Morris, Eric Bieniemy, no longer Brian Dable, Thomas Patrick, Jim Caldwell, and Joe Lombardi. And that's a closed case. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already for more sports content in the near future. This video was a lot longer than expected and longer than normal. Let me know down in the comments if you like videos like this and where you think these head coaches should end up. And make sure to check out the links in the description for some cool sports gear. That's all. I hope you have a great day, and peace.
I search for perfection. I know I'm far from perfect, but ain't nothing that can stop me. I'm on my grind for certain. Tell me if you're working harder, if you're hardly working.